Welp, that break was short, but it's time to get back to work. Remember the video that I made where I asked the question, how many socialists were elected to the United States Congress? And then I proceeded to list the people who were socialists elected to the United States Congress. Well, not that long after the video came out, I found out that there was at least one other person that was a socialist that I didn't mention in that video, which led me down a rabbit hole to basically re-look at the topic, and turns out there were quite more than a few people that I missed. Now this was actually good because I had already planned to revisit the topic and make a part 2 where I would analyze some people who I thought were socialists that were elected to the United States Congress. Now, what I could have done is made a video where I looked at the definitive socialists and then kicked this off to the side, but instead, we're going to do something similar to what I did with my fascist video, except in reverse. We're going to start off with the ones that were definitive, and then we'll make our way to the ones who are not as definitive. For those of you who are watching this video and haven't seen the original one, I'll catch you up to speed on a couple of things. First, the guidelines. The rules in the original video were that the member of Congress had to be a member of an explicitly socialist political group / party, or if they weren't, they had to independently identify as a socialist. For this one, we're going to expand it a little bit. Now, they don't technically have to even identify as a socialist, but their actions have to be very socialist-minded, and /or have a prominent history in a socialist group that would dictate their philosophy in Congress. Like, it doesn't matter if they were like a young far-left activist. When they get to Congress, did that philosophy actually correlate? For example, Kyrsten Sinema point-blank identified herself as a socialist very early on in her political career, but now she is anything but. A similar situation happened with Bobby Rush. He was a diehard member of the Marxist-Leninist Black Panther Party, and then he turns around and now endorses a corporate Republican for president. A similar but less egregious example comes from Rahul Grijalva. When he was younger, he was very much active in a socialist political group called the Raza Unida Party, but in Congress, he is more of just like a left liberal progressive type. If he were a 2-time Bernie bro, then maybe I'd consider putting him here, but since he did that 2020 turncoat for Warren, I can't really say that Raul is a diehard socialist. If you remember where we left off, I concluded that there were at least 22 socialists that were elected to the United States Congress. Horace Greeley, Richard Pettigrew, Henry Smith, Victor L. Berger, Meyer London, Fiorello LaGuardia, Vito Marcantonio, John Bernard, Hugh DeLacy, Leo Isaacson, William H. Mayer, John Conyers, Ron Dellums, David Bonnier, Major Owens, Bernie Sanders, Danny K. Davis, AOC, Rashida Tlaib, Ilhan Omar, Cory Bush, and Jamal Bowman. That's where we left off. Let's see how many comrades we can add. First, in between that video and this video, we had an election, and that election was actually pretty good for socialists, as it led to the election of at least 3 of them, all of which being DSA-affiliated Democrats. Greg Casar, serving in Texas District 35, Summer Lee, serving in Pennsylvania 12, who I should mention is a former DSA member. She was a member of the group until 2021, due to a controversy surrounding Jamal Bowman, causing her to leave the group. But I would have to say, I doubt that she changed her entire philosophy once leaving the group. And, very much strangely, in Michigan District 13, we have Shari Thanadar. Despite a lot of misgivings with him, he is apparently a card-carrying member of DSA, according to some reliable sources. Although, if true, it is literally the most paper of paper memberships, as he didn't even run on that when he was running for his seat. For the ones that are long gone, we will start with Ketil Halvorsen of the People's Party, who served 1 term from 1891 to 1893 in Minnesota's 5th District. Ketil had actually joined the Socialist Party and attempted to run for North Dakota's at-large seat in 1906. Second, we have George R. Lunn, who served in New York's 30th District from 1917 to 1919 as a Democrat. However, prior to that, he had served 2 terms as mayor of Schenectady under the banner of the Socialist Party, and the state Democratic Party practically begged him to run for Congress. Third, we have Homer Truett Bone, senator from Washington from 1933 to 1944, again as a Democrat. Similarly, early on in his political career, he was a member of the Socialist Party. And prior to his service in the chamber, he had attempted to run under the banner of another socialist political party. And when he served, he continued pushing for socialistic agendas like public ownership of utilities. Next, we have Andrew Bell Melier, who served Wisconsin District 5 from 1945 to 1947 and 1949 to 1951 as a Democrat. Similarly, he was also a member of the Socialist Party before he went to Congress. Next, we have Jerry O'Connell, who served 1 term in Montana's 1st District from 1937 to 1939 as a Democrat. O'Connell had been very active in left-wing activity, heading to Spain on a Comintern-sponsored trip to raise awareness against Franco, chairing the National Committee to defeat the Munt Bill, a bill that would force CPUSA members to register with the Attorney General, and supported the defendants in the Smith trial. Now, to break some trends, why don't we head over to an area of the United States that I guarantee you we overlooked? The territories. Even though their representatives don't have voting power, they do get elected, and they can have party affiliations and political ideologies, and it just so happens, some of them were socialists. And by some, I mean 2. For a brief period of time, from the 30s and the 40s, the Socialist Party of Puerto Rico had a large amount of power, forming an electoral alliance with the pro-statehood Republican Union Party, broadly known as the Coalition, to elect 2 resident commissioners to the United States House. Santiago Iglesias, who served from 1933 to 1939, and his son-in-law, Bolivar Pagan, who served from 1939 to 1945. Back to the mainland, we're shifting to people who were part of a broader political party that was socialist. We'll start off with the Nonpartisan League. The group was created by a former Socialist Party leader and pushed for state-run industries. I would say it's a little bit accurate to call the people active in this group socialists. First, we have John Miller Bayer, who served as the state's representative from 1917 to 1921. Next, we have Lynn Frazier, who served as the state senator from 1923 to 1941, and William Lemke, who served as the state's representative from 1933 to 1941 and 1943 to 1950. Now, there was technically one more person who was elected with the Nonpartisan League banner, but for many reasons, I don't think he counts as a socialist. Next up, we have members of the Minnesota Farmer Labor Party. Yes, we all know about John Bernard. I originally thought that he was the one and done, but then, right after I made the video, I saw at least one other member of the Minnesota Farmer Labor Party that was a socialist. And then I decided to do some digging when I looked more into their governor for the top governors list video. So I basically started looking into them, so then I started to wonder, maybe I should actually do it in reverse and look into these guys to find out if they explicitly denied being socialists. And the only member that they elected to Congress that explicitly denounced socialism was Henrik Shipstad, who was also rather reactionary. The rest of the members, well, at the very least, they leaned in a somewhat socialistic direction. And we actually have a lot of members to get to. First, William Layton Cars, who served in the House from 1919 to 1921 and 1925 to 1929. Ole J. Cavale, who served in Congress from 1923 to 1929. Knud Whitfield, who served in the House from 1923 to 1927. Ole's brother Pon John Cavale, who served in the House from 1929 to 1939. Magnus Johnson, who served in the Senate from 1923 to 1925, and later the House from 1933 to 1935. Henry M. Arens, who served in the House from 1933 to 1935. Francis Shoemaker, who served in the House from 1933 to 1935. Rich T. Buckley, who served from 1935 to 1943. Elmer Austin Benson, who served in the Senate from 1935 to 1937. Ernest Lundeen, who served one term as a House Republican from 1915 to 1917, and as a House Farmer Laborite from 1933 to 1937, and as a Senate Farmer Laborite from 1937 to 1940, and lastly, Harold Hagen, who served as a Farmer Laborite from 1943 to 1945, and from 1945 to 1955 as a Republican. Phew, we still haven't even gotten to the speculatives. And we're still not going to get there because I have one more name that I think I can definitively say is a socialist. I'm at the very least 80% sure. I was on the fence about him for a little bit, but I basically decided I either think he is or he isn't. And I'm just going to say I'm pretty sure he is. Who am I talking about? Well, I'm talking about someone who was a representative from Wisconsin District 3 from 1885 to 1891, and a senator from Wisconsin from 1906 to 1925, Robert M. La Follette Sr. That's right, no random obscure senator now. I'm going to sit here and tell you that one of the famous 5 of one of the most diehard capitalist countries in the world is actually a socialist. And don't worry, I came packed with some evidence. First, the policies he supported were obviously very socialistic. Public ownership of railroads and electric industries, a peace-based foreign policy, helping labor unions, that kind of jazz. But I hear you say, you don't have to be a socialist to support those policies. Fair. How about the fact that he very much openly touted and supported socialist causes, supporting the Bolsheviks during the Russian Revolution, saying that they were struggling to establish an industrial democracy, as well as decry U.S. involvement in the following Russian Civil War, calling out the fact that it was just capitalists stopping their worst fear, also calling out the Palmer raids during the first Red Scare, and openly supporting the pardoning of Eugene Debs. Now, again, you don't have to be a socialist to say any of that stuff, but one more piece of evidence I'll say was that his electoral coalition was just filled to the brim with socialists. It wasn't even like an FDR thing where it's like, oh, they just so happened to be there. No. It seemed like wherever he went, socialists were just not that far away from him. Again, with the stuff that I mentioned previously, but also when he actively tried to form a third party. Literally, he went to the Socialist Party to basically be the backbone of this group. He actively turned away the Communist Party, but he actively brought in the Socialist Party. Now, any of these 3 things in a vacuum might not be enough to qualify, but seeing all these 3 together make me think, okay, this is not really like an out of the blue thing, this is more of a pattern. So those are all the ones that I can definitively say, at the very least a majority percentage I can say are socialists. The rest of the people in this video are ones that I have like an asterisk next to. Like, I will propose pieces of evidence to back up my claims, but I'll also explain that they may or may not count. And this one isn't even like equal as well. I'll start off again with the ones that probably have the most amount of evidence, and then as we go on, the evidence will start waning. First, we have Augustus Hawkins, who served California from 1963 to 1991 as a Democrat. The evidence is that prior to Congress, Hawkins was a member of Upton Sinclair's End Poverty in California movement, winning his first elected office that way. But aside from that, nothing much else. Next, we have George Crockett Jr., representative from Michigan from 1980 to 1991 as a Democrat. The evidence for him was that he was actually one of the people who attended the founding of DSA. He never ended up becoming a member, but he did attend the foundation of the group. I say that has to be worth at least something. Next, we have Glenn H. Taylor, who served Idaho in the United States Senate from 1945 to 1951. The evidence for him is that he was one of the furthest left members of the United States Congress, and he was commonly referred to as a socialist, and was even technically part of a coalition with the Communist Party. And while yes, the Communist Party thing was heavily built up, even though in reality they didn't have that much to do with it, it has to be worth something. By that notion, you might ask, well, does that mean that the other Progressive Party VP is on here? Well, no, there's actually quite a lot of factors going against him. Next, we have Koya Knutson, who served in Minnesota District 9 from 1955 to 1959 as a DFLer. The evidence is that her family had a history in socialist politics, and she continued on that trend in the House. In fact, she was literally drafted to run against one of the people that I had already mentioned in the list, so that district already had a tendency of going socialist. Next, we have Gus Savage, who served Illinois District 2 from 1981 to 1993 as a Democrat. The evidence? Early on in his political career, he was affiliated with Henry Wallace's Progressive Party. So if it counts for Glenn H. Taylor, it should count for him too. Next, we have Roy William Wire, who served Minnesota District 3 from 1949 to 1961 as a DFLer. The evidence is that in the merger of the D and the FL, he had came from the FL side, and he had consistently voted very far left in the United States House. Next, we have Lyman Trumbull, who served in the United States Senate from 1955 to 1973 as a liberal Republican. Evidence: after his congressional tenure, he was part of the legal team with Clarence Darrow to support Eugene Debs in his first arrest. While technically not that out of the blue for someone not as a socialist to do so, it does seem very interesting that that is one of his prime cases. Next, we have Adam Clayton Powell, who served in New York in Congress from 1945 to 1971 as a Democrat. The evidence is prior to his congressional tenure, he served as a member of the American Labor Party in the New York City Council, and was affiliated with them in his first couple of terms. Another thing that he did during his tenure was apparently he supported the presidential candidacy of Dick Gregory under the PFP split-off faction. But to rewind a little bit, with La Follette being considered a socialist, wouldn't that mean that his son, who served in the Senate from 1925 to 1947 as a progressive Republican, wouldn't he count as a socialist too? Maybe. I mean, the apple probably didn't fall too far from the tree. In fact, he reportedly had communists working in his congressional staff, though granted, that was probably McCarthyism attempting to exploit that for political capital, which was unfortunately what ended up leading to La Follette Jr. taking his own life. But I guess technically, if his dad counts as a socialist, he should probably at the very least be considered. And while we're on the same track, La Follette had directly inspired a group of people in his state, the Wisconsin Progressive Party, which was very much inspired by him, his son, and his other son, Fox. Would the members elected to Congress under the Wisconsin Progressive Party count as socialists or not? Maybe, but interestingly, not just because of their association with the La Follettes. It would actually also because they had a very strange relationship with the Wisconsin Socialist Party, basically agreeing to a pact with each other to never run against each other, and even having crossover voters with them. Progressives in that area would run as socialists, and socialists who wanted to go statewide would run as progressives. One of the socialist legislators even quipping, saying that Wisconsin progressives were just a socialist with the brains knocked out. So, let's just add the people who were elected as Wisconsin progressives. Representative Gerald J. Bullier, who served from 1931 to 1939, Representative Gardner R. Withrow, who served from 1931 to 1939, Representative Thomas William Omley, who served from 1935 to 1939, Representative George J. Schneider, who served from 1935 to 1939, Representative Bernard J. Gurman, who served from 1935 to 1943, Representative Harry Southoff, who served from 1935 to 1939 and 1941 to 1945, and Representative Merlin Hull, who served from 1935 to 1947. Man, with each passing person, I'm starting to think that Wheeler might have a better shot than I thought previously, but again, he has a little bit too much to work against him. While we're in this sort of crowd of parties, why don't we talk a little bit about the Green Party, as there were some members of the United States Congress who became members of the Green Party at one point, either before or after. While the Green Party had not officially become socialist until the 2016 election, they definitely were not so shy about having some socialists in their ranks. So maybe members of Congress who had socialist leanings left to join the Greens because they realized that their party might not be too kind in accepting socialists, where the Greens would, and that leads to 3 former Democrats who left to join the Greens after their tenure. First, we have Jim Weaver, who served Oregon District 4 from 1975 to 1987. Then we have Daniel Hamburg, who served California District 1 from 1993 to 1995. And lastly, we have a controversial choice, former Congresswoman Cynthia McKinney, who served in the House from 1993 to 2003, and from 2005 to 2007. The last one of those 3 very much has a lot of weirdness about them. You see, because they ran for president immediately after they left the House of Representatives, and in their race, they were endorsed by prominent socialist figures and groups. But basically every year since then, she has just steadily shifted to the right, to the point where if there was any form of socialism that she espoused then, she would probably be more comfortable if I put the word national in front of it. To get off of that trend, I'm going to talk about something that might be controversial to people who might view this: Georgism. Georgism is a very confusing political ideology. Mr. Beast made a video about it, and one of the most confusing parts about it is that there are a lot of people who are considered Georgists who would also be considered socialists. There's been a lot of crossover between the two groups. So I have to ask, would people who espouse to Georgism in the US Congress count as socialists? I don't know, but for the sake of this video, we'll just say yes. First, we have Henry George Jr., who served New York in the House as a Democrat from 1911 to 1915, the son of the ideology's founder, Henry George. Next, we have Tom L. Johnson, who served Ohio District 12 from 1891 to 1895, William Butchup Wilson, who served Pennsylvania District 15 from 1907 to 1913, William Kent, who served California in the House from 1911 to 1917, George Norris, who served as a member of the House in Nebraska's 5th District from 1903 to 1913, and the U.S. Senate from 1913 to 1943, and lastly, Paul Douglas, who served as Illinois Senator from 1949 to 1967. Next, we have Usher L. Burdick, who served as North Dakota's Congressman from 1935 to 1945, and 1949 to 1959 as a Republican. The evidence for him was that he had a pretty left-wing record, but most notably came from the fact that he was one of 2 members of Congress to vote against the Communist Control Act. Next, we have Quentin Burdick, who served as North Dakota's congressman from 1959 to 1960, and as one of their senators from 1960 to 1992 as a member of the Democratic Nonpartisan League Party. Evidence? Like his dad, he was a pretty left-wing voice in Congress, and he was openly affiliated with further left movements like Wallace's Progressive Party. Next, we have Abraham J. Moulter, who served New York District 14 from 1947 to 1953, and 13 from 1953 to 1967 as a Democrat. Evidence? He was the only other member of Congress who voted against the Communist Control Act, but unlike the Burdicks, that's really all I have for him. Next, we have Caroline O'Day, who served New York's 2nd at-large district from 1935 to 1945. Evidence for her: she was one of 4 representatives to vote against the Smith Act, but she also has a decently left-wing record that I can say would probably count at the very least somewhat socialistic. In case you're wondering, 1 is already included, and the other 2 I can't include. Next, we have Jeanette Rankin, who served 2 stints in Congress representing Montana from 1917 to 1919 and 1941 to 1943 as a Republican. The evidence is that she accepted the nomination of the National Party, a party that was founded by pro-war Socialist Party members, but she did not do anything else to indicate any support for socialism. Next is Charles August Lindbergh, who served Minnesota District 6 from 1907 to 1917 as a Republican. Evidence? This Lindbergh pushed some pretty left-wing stuff in Congress and had some affiliations with socialist political groups like the Nonpartisan League and the Farmer Labor Rights. But I don't know if this necessarily counts, or if he was just some nondescript populist like Coughlin, and considering his son's politics, maybe he was just proof of the Red-Brown Alliance. And last but least, we have Samuel Dickstein, who served New York in Congress from 1923 to 1945 as a Democrat. Evidence: he started a subcommittee to investigate American fascist movements in the United States, like the German-American Bund and the Silver Legion of America during World War II, since the US was not doing enough. Basically, think of it as reverse McCarthyism. Now you might say, just because he was anti-fascist doesn't mean he's socialist. Fair point. But one thing that definitely got people's attention was the fact that he thought the US was being so inefficient in combating fascism that he actually began a relationship with the Soviet Union and the NKVD and began selling US secrets to them in order to help combat the Nazis. However, he did run against Meyer London, so I don't know if he's just a socialist or he was just smart enough to understand that fascism was bad. But I know at the very least one person said that he should have been included, so this one's for you. So yeah, that is at least 80 members of the United States Congress that might have been socialist. 81 if you're kind enough to include Wheeler. That's still the vast minority, but it's definitely a bigger number than a lot of us probably expected. If you think there's more to make a part 3 or want to complain about any of the people that I put on this list, leave a comment below. Thanks for watching this video. Be sure to like, comment, share, and subscribe, and click that bell to be notified when a future video of mine comes out. And if you're interested in more content from me, you can go to my website, follow me on Twitter, join my Discord, or consider supporting me on Patreon. Back to the same old grind.